one of the issues that has come up this week was the lawsuit filed by Donald Trump against the New York Times for general defamation and not being nice to King Donald without any specifics, as far as I could tell. And that lawsuit was thrown out yesterday by a federal judge. The question is now, to what extent will Trump appeal? Could it even go to the Supreme Court, where there have been 24 so-called shadow dockets? So these are things that the Supreme Court decides on, not in the merit docket where they spend weeks and months debating stuff and then there are long opinions written, but a kind of emergency case, often heard literally in the middle of the night. And in 24 out of 24 cases, they have always ruled in Trump's favor. Now, these decisions only stand for a short period. They're supposed to be then reviewed by a full session of the Supreme Court. But even, after 1 or 2 years, but even in 1 or 2 years, you can, deport a lot of people and do a lot of damage and shut down departments and newspapers and all the rest of it. But the New York Times thing seems to have gone their way for now. So to discuss this, I'm joined by Chris Michael, Guardian US Live News editor and host of the Reverberate podcast. I said that badly. Reverberate. There we go. The podcast. Chris, welcome to you.
Thanks. Hi, Matt.
How significant is this business over the New York Times? First, the lawsuit itself, and then the fact that it was thrown out.
Well, the lawsuit is pure frivolity on the face of it. And that's exactly why the judge threw it out. He essentially said, it's too long and it's really boring. He said, it's 85 pages long. It took you 80 pages to get to the defamation.
It's longer than the New York Times Sunday edition.
Exactly. And so, he was accusing it of having mixed metaphors. It was very funny response. But he basically said, look, you're welcome to come back and try it again, but just make it short and to the point this time. And so, the Trump will definitely do that. They will come at them again because this is really just a sort of a blip in the road. I mean, the lawsuit itself will remain entirely spurious, but in some ways that doesn't really matter. He may not even need to win it. What he needs to do or what he wants to do is just threaten anyone who disagrees with him.
Right. I mean, there was also the lawsuit against the Wall Street Journal, which is, owned by Rupert Murdoch. And of course, Rupert Murdoch or the Murdoch empire also owns Fox News, which tends to be very friendly to Trump. The Wall Street Journal has discovered its editorial spine in a number of ways. And that lawsuit still stands, doesn't it?
Yes, absolutely. He's going after them for publishing the Epstein birthday letter, saying it was fake. Then, it was immediately published by loads of other outlets. So clearly, wasn't fake. So again, on the face of it, he doesn't really have a great case with them, but he didn't really have a great one with ABC when he sued them, or with CBS when he sued them. And both of them caved, coincidentally, for $16 million each. Because, the media is concentrated in the hands of a few extremely rich people who have a wide array of business interests that seem to be outweighing their need to protect free speech.
So this is interesting, isn't it? So he throws out these lawsuits that are pretty spurious. I mean, it's a bit like chucking spaghetti against the wall to see what sticks, and some of it sticks and some of it doesn't. The numbers are crazy. He's suing them for 10 billion and the other lot for 15 billion without explaining the difference, without, coming up with any details. But, as you said, some of them have settled for maybe 16 million or 20 million. Is the main point here to just intimidate editors and newsrooms around America? And is that working?
Yeah, it is absolutely A, intended to intimidate people, and B, you could say it is working. One of the few people not to be sued by Trump is the Washington Post, which is owned by Jeff Bezos, which sort of got ahead of it by saying that they would shift the opinion pages to the right and pulling their endorsement of Kamala Harris in the election. So, Bezos knows he's equally exposed to Trump's whims because of Amazon and all his government contracts. So in that sense, already the Post is shifting, and CBS has hired an ombudsman to review complaints and this is a very right-wing person that they've hired to do that. So you can absolutely see that already there's a kind of a chill in the air, and you can see as well by the fact that comedians, I think, are going to have to watch what they say now as well after what happened to Jimmy Kimmel this week.
I mean, the other thing I find really chilling is the fact that there are many people in MAGA world and in the administration, including the vice president and Steve Miller, whose clip we heard earlier, and the president too, who are prepared before we even knew who was responsible for the killing of Charlie Kirk to draw a direct line between his death and critics of the Trump administration in the media and on Capitol Hill. And when they knew that this was a lone suspect, Tyler Robinson, acting for his own reasons, even though he might have been reading, I don't know what he was reading, the New York Times or BuzzFeed, whatever. I mean, the point is they're drawing a direct line between the murder of one of their friends and an entire ecosystem of politics that is not on side with the administration. And that I find dangerous.
It's extremely dangerous. The Trump administration is currently preparing an executive order for Trump to sign that would crack down on Antifa, which is the sort of it's not even a real organization, more of a sort of a movement or an idea that, means anti-fascist. But, they can use that to basically go after anybody that they feel is sort of insufficiently right-wing or in support of Trump. As you say, very little was known about the killer at the time. That was the point that Kimmel was making in his joke. You might have sort of thought it was perhaps a little bit insensitive, but it wasn't a joke about Charlie Kirk at all.
No.
He's basically just saying, MAGA are trying to spin this for political reasons, which they absolutely are. Whenever there's a kind of a lone wolf gunman who's right-wing, who kills, say, a Democratic politician, as we saw in Minnesota earlier this year, or, breaks into Nancy Pelosi's house with a hammer, attempting to injure her. It's always, there's just a crazy. But, when you have J.D. Vance saying, actually, the vast majority of terrorism comes from the left wing, which is 100% not true, then you see that really it's not about lone wolves for them. Any sort of criticism of Trump is sort of indirectly responsible somehow for the political violence that we're seeing. And it becomes a very scary thing where they can just go after anybody who doesn't agree with them.
I mean, it's worth pointing out that President Trump himself made fun of the guy who did bash in to some extent, the skull of Nancy Pelosi's husband with a hammer, who was a self-confessed extreme right-winger. Trump made fun of him, made fun of this event. And the late Charlie Kirk, it has to be said, was shouting out on his podcast for someone to bail this guy out of jail in San Francisco, right? And so I think the lionization of him as the kind of Jesus Christ of free speech and debate is a bit strange, to put it mildly.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie Kirk himself, before he died, said about as clearly as you could that there's no such thing as hate speech in America. He said, you can have ugly speech, you can have gross speech, but we have free speech, and that's it.
And to be fair to him, he took the fight to the campuses, and he enjoyed having that kind of, that debate with students. He was trying to do that when he was killed.
Yeah, absolutely. That was his whole thing. You can basically say anything. And now immediately his legacy is being used to prove the exact opposite. Yeah. They're basically saying, rebranding sort of free speech as hate speech, rebranding cancel culture as consequence culture, and basically saying that anybody who isn't sufficiently worked up about Kirk's killing in exactly the way that we would want them to, could be deported, could be arrested. Pam Bondi is saying that, she'll go after people who espouse hate speech. There is no hate speech in U.S. law, with very few exceptions. It doesn't exist. And so for the top lawyer in the U.S. to say that she's going to go after people for hate speech and prosecute them is chilling.
And the vice president saying that if you've heard of anyone to cast aspersions on Charlie Kirk or who made fun of his death, report them to your boss and we'll get them fired. And that has actually happened in some places. Just finally, and very briefly, Chris, how wrong is it, let me rephrase that, how wrong is it for the US to lecture the UK, where we've had our own issues, on free speech?
Yeah, I mean, I did think, was it Robert Peston's question to Trump when he was in London?
Checkers.
Earlier, Checkers exactly, was a bit strange. Where is free speech more under attack? It's just incredibly hypocritical, and there's almost nothing more galling than having J.D. Vance, the sort of deputy authoritarian, come over to Europe and lecture them on freedoms when there's a wide-scale crackdown on freedom of speech, on just basically the freedom to exist, unless if you're an immigrant. In the U.S. and it's the hypocrisy is is absolutely staggering. But I think at this point, we've seen that these autocrats aren't they're not bound by shame.